Hey there, welcome to First Look, and you made it. You're through one season and entering another season, and that's this is one of those times of the year that's so many things, and I'm glad to be rediscovering that and remembering that with you. So we move from the end of one liturgical year, church calendar year. The calendar church year actually ends with Reign of Christ, Christ the King Sunday, and begins. This is a new year with Advent, and so this first Sunday is where we start that. And in my time at Northmont, we've kind of done different types of things. And I've latched on to this series, which is certainly not just me. I mean, colleagues and friends of mine, a lot of folks are doing this series because it's a group called Sanctified Art, and they put out these different seasonal series throughout the year. And I've been using the one for the Advent season now for the last couple of years. And the theme for this year, so what they do is it's kind of an all-inclusive thing. So they do liturgy and sermon guides, and it's almost like a VBS kit, but for preaching. So there's devotionals that you can pass out. There's artwork you can use for your bulletins or other things. There's liturgy. There's sermon guides. There's Advent calendars. Just all sorts of different little things. And so it's nice to kind of do things on a theme, which kind of brings everything to life. And you need some inspiration when you're kind of going back to these things in the way that we do. And this particular theme is called Words for the Beginning. And the idea of the theme is it's kind of having this fly on the wall view of Mary talking with infant Jesus. So that's the imaginary kind of concept that they're working off of. So it's Mary with her newborn child. And what kind of stories, what kind of words would Mary say to her newborn? And this past week as I was preaching about the kingdom of God and Jesus and the idea of him being royal, being king, being Alpha and Omega, those kinds of ideas. And the way I introduced it was, what kinds of reminders do we need in order to understand how important our faith is and who we are and why we do what we do, right? And for the last, since October, I've been talking about who we are, right? This identity thing. And all of that, I think, bleeds nicely into this theme because all of what I think this Advent season is looking at is what prepares us. Knowing who we are, knowing who loves us, knowing how we're loved, are all a huge part of having the kind of the strength and the fortitude and the firm foundation on which to stand to do the next thing. And so Words for the Beginning is the theme in this particular week as I move down and look to make sure I know exactly what it is. This one is called just simply a statement of reminder that you are a blessing. And that's one of those phrases that I telling people, reminding people that that's true about them collectively, but also individually, which is one of those things that you kind of take for granted until you hear it enough, and then it's bound to make you weep at some point. because some of us have a hard time believing it. Some of us have a hard time seeing ourselves that way. And, I think if you look at young Jesus, and I'm thinking about the stories that he would need to be told, I can imagine if you start to look at that, what happens in his infant life, that he would need that reminder pretty strongly. We go through the story of Jesus, and in the nice things about it, there's all these lovely, heartwarming things that we talk about. And, at least in my tenure, we also talk about the hard parts. We talk about the fear and the outsiderness of Mary and Joseph. We talk about the fleeing. We talk about the refugee status of them for their Jesus' first early years, fleeing to Egypt, and the chaos and just sort of this murderous reign of Herod, trying to find infant Jesus, the warning of the Magi and all that, and coming back to Israel and starting over in the same small town where Joseph grew up, and just that kind of early hardship and trauma, and the things that are really impactful, I think, when you stop to think about them, and we bypass them so quickly to get to the manger and the gifts and that, and I understand why. That's lovely and comforting and all that it is, and I enjoy them just as much as you do. But I think that part of my job as someone who tries to convey the truth of the gospel, tries to convey the impact of that, is to remind us of the whole of the story. And so this first one kind of plants home for us an idea that I think some of us, like I said, have a hard time getting our minds around and believing. And also, in addition, if you think about the traditional words that we associate with Advent, there's those kind of guide words. Week one is hope, and then peace, and then joy, and then love, right? Hope, peace, joy, and love. And we repeat those sort of either in the forefront or in the backdrop every year. And so, this is something that is a reminder of that as well. Just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. So the passage that was chosen for this particular idea, the reminder that you are a blessing, this is from Luke 1, verses 26 through 38. And I always think that jumping into this first part of the gospel is jarring, if I'm honest, because we spend 95% of the time not right here, right? Because even around Lent, we still have a fully grown Jesus, right? Adult Jesus doing miracles and working and helping people and loving people. Like, we have that, and we have the same thing in Lent. And so we're either talking about Jesus, we're talking about, the epistles, or we're talking about the Old Testament. A very small segment of our time is spent in this little area where Jesus is not fully aware of his surroundings, but that the world is kind of reacting to him. And that, I think, just to be plopped down in this place, I always find a little, not disconcerting, but I always have to get my bearings. Because what I'm reminded of is that to this point in the Israel story, there's a few hundred years, almost 400 years between the last Old Testament book, right? Like, or the teachings, the time period of those last books, right? They come back from exile, they rebuild the temple, they start to rebuild Jerusalem, and then it kind of ends, right? It's like those stories end. And then we get this what they call intercanonical time period in between canon. And I think at some point I did a video a couple of years ago. If you remember, I was doing a series on one book, one story, and I did a whole book or a whole week. I think it was a week, maybe 2 weeks, on just that period of time, just to kind of give you an idea of like what's happening. And it's a lot of strife, as you would imagine. It's a lot of the people of Israel who had returned, kind of keeping other empires at bay, revolts and a lot of like warfare and that kind of thing. And then eventually, of course, Rome takes over, right? The empire takes over, and we enter back into the story where that is already well established, right? But obviously it took time in between them getting back from Jerusalem, and then the different empires. I'm blanking on which ones they were, and then eventually Rome coming in and being this force. I will post that video I did just to kind of give us all a little reminder. Anyway, just in case you're interested. So that kind of sets the scene that we haven't heard from God in any kind of official biblical way for a long time, right? And so now is Jesus kind of I think it sets the stage for the Messiah even more dramatically, because now it's been so long. The return has happened, and that was joyous, but that's been a long time now, and generations and generations have come and gone, and now we're in this place where they're occupied by this other nation or this other empire, and so it's like, where is God? Does God still exist? Do prophets still speak? And that's where we are, if you think about the story of Jesus. So let me read to you this particular passage. It's very, very familiar, obviously, but I think setting the stage of it as a kind of long silence desperation, I think is impactful. So let me read the story now. Luke 1:26-38. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be, because angels didn't just pop over and say hello, and they didn't always do so for a good reason. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus," or Yeshua. There was no word Jesus in Hebrew. We say Jesus. They said Yeshua. "He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and his reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom there will be no end." Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" And the angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy. He will be called Son of God. And now your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son, and this is the 6th month for her who is said to be barren, for nothing will be impossible with God." Then Mary said, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. I'm always overwhelmed and fascinated by that story. I don't think some of it's just like your own concept of parenthood kind of seeps in there. I guess it would have to be. I guess I must read that story and think about that story differently as a parent than I did before. And I try to look at it from a number of different types of perspectives, but I think that the theme, the curriculum that I'm using for this season is asking me to look at it a little bit less from Mary's perspective and a little bit more from what would it be like to be told that story if you were Jesus. I think that's the way I kind of read that. So I think these are then words that Mary is saying. Mary is saying to young Jesus, "You are a blessing." And he may have felt like anything but a blessing. And so as I read it, I get this sense, like if I'm thinking about Jesus at, I don't know, when could you hear that story and comprehend it? 6 or 7 maybe? Trying to get your mind around that this is my mom telling me, maybe for the first time, how I'm here. And I don't know what you do with that. I think what happens is, like most children, Jesus hears that story, asks a couple of questions, and then does what most children do, which is he's going to hold on to it for 3 months and then ask one question about it at dinner. And then Mary and Joseph have to look around and go like, "Did you tell him? Okay, wait, now what are we supposed to say?" And then they try to tell him whatever the answer is to his question, because that's the way that kids process things. And which is really how we should all process things, like not just blurt things out, but take some time with them and actually think about them. Which I think is why Mary is so mature and thoughtful, and why she's chosen, because she's talked about as someone who ponders things in her heart all the time. She actually just thinks through things with some patience, which I don't do very well, by the way. And my guess is that Jesus spent a lot of his young life processing what all of that meant, which is why, when you get to the story where he's 12 and he's in the temple and, he's trying to learn and whatever, why he could have just been overwhelmed to the point of forgetting to talk with his parents about it. Because he could have just gotten so distracted and so overwhelmed by all these thoughts that have been in his head for so long, and finally maybe he had some kind of outlet for them. He connected with something in the temple that sort of triggered something, and all of that, all those stories and blessings came kind of flooding back, and now he had the opportunity to actually think about them, process them with other people other than his family, because he was in the temple, he was in the big time, he was with all these priests and whatever and learning, and it's not just so anyway, it's hard to imagine, if you're Jesus, if you're a child, what all of that could have meant to you. And probably not all of it meant anything. But I think the parts, because you'd have to take a lifetime to think about that. And I think, as I'm thinking through it, part of what I might do is try to take some of these stories and apply them to Lent, So when we get to Lent, it's like, okay, Jesus processed this story and then got here during Lent. How did the stories that he heard as a child about himself inform the ways that he did his ministry? We'll see if I remember to do that or not. Anyway, so, but I think that Jesus trying to remember that he's a blessing must have been sometimes a really difficult thing. One, because he must have at some point realized that he was different than other kids, but also because his life to that point had not been easy. And he may have started to understood that part of the reason why it wasn't easy was because of just him being a person, him being in the world. He wasn't liked simply by existing. And I've talked to people who feel that way because of who they are, that feel unwanted or hated or scorned or dismissed because of just who they were born. And that's awful and tragic and shame on us collectively and individually for allowing people to feel that way. And I can try to remind people who feel that way that who they are naturally is not bad. It's that society has created difference and has created hierarchies that make them feel that way, but that who God is doesn't think or feel the same thing. And that's a whole other sermon for a whole other day. But I think any of us, especially if you've gone through any kind of hardship or setback or a feeling of personal guilt or shame or shortcoming, whatever it happens to be, if you have been or are in an era of your life where you feel lesser than, especially if it's by your own doing or by something you couldn't overcome, it is one of the hardest things in the world to convince yourself that you are something other than what you have told yourself that you are. If you're a bad person, if you're never going to be a good person, and you've told yourself that, it is really hard to be convinced otherwise. And the only way I know for that to happen is that there is some level of self-acceptance that has to happen, but it also is prompted by us reminding each other as intentionally and thoughtfully as we can, reminding the person in front of us that they are. And we don't often enough. And, I've seen you do that. I've seen you do that in conversation. I've seen you do that with cards. I've seen you do that with visits. I've seen you do that with gifts and gestures of kindness. But we can't do it enough. People can't be reminded enough that they're blessings. And because you're fighting against their impulse to reject that premise. The person in front of you, if you're being kind to them, some part of them is rejecting what you're saying. They're telling themselves that they're not telling you the truth. That the person who says you're a blessing is lying to you or exaggerating. You're not actually that good. You're not actually that special. You're not actually a blessing. Maybe you're not a bad person. Maybe you're not, you're not the devil incarnate, but you're not a good person. You're fighting against that. So you're not just saying something good that someone needs to hear. You're also needing to say it sometimes in a way that you are combating that thing inside of them that would reject that offering, which makes every time we offer it that much more important, but it also means that it bears repeating. And I think if Jesus would have had to have heard it over and over and over again, and maybe the fact that he did hear it over and over and over again is how we get the Jesus as an adult that we do, because his parents reminded him over and over and over again, because he needed to hear it. So, that might be where you are right now. You might be in a place where you feel like, boy, the world is not what I want it to be, or life is not what I want it to be, or things are harder around me, or I feel incapable of affecting change around me, right? Like that might be you too. I fall into that category a lot, where I feel like, there's war here and there's war there, and things around me are hard, and people are fearful, or people are this and that, and you feel like, what do I do? Like, how do I? And that makes you feel insignificant, and that makes you feel small. And that's the kind of reminder that you need, because that's true. So, if you need to hear it today, you are a blessing. And we'll try to continue to say that for each other. And that's the way that Advent starts. It starts with an encouragement. Those are the words from the beginning that we're going from. So, I hope this series is what you need this year. I hope it brings you something that is comforting, convicting, thoughtful. That's the goal. So that's where we start, and I'm looking forward to doing all this with you. Advent is a wonderful time because it gives us that sense of like starting over, and that's a very, very cool thing. All right, have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. If I don't see you between now and Sunday, I hope that every blessing and gift is yours in this season. Thank you for being you, and I hope to see you next time for another First Look. Take care.